The EA Black Box name is synonymous with the Need for Speed franchise, one of the premium developers, until they released Undercover. Honestly, one of the worst racing games I've ever played. Not the worst, to be clear, but it's a game I never want to play again as long as I live. But to be fair, Black Box were under the pump, as Undercover was one of 3 games they made the same year, which is bonkers, really. On January 2009, EA announced that Black Box were working on an action title, and this was around the time of the financial crisis, so it was assumed EA were relying more on an established IP for commercial success. But EA marketer Keith Monroe assumed it was to branch across multiple genres with the series, which I've talked about countless times in previous Need for Speed reviews. You had Shift, more focused on simulation racing, Shift to its sequel, Nitro, an all-vibrant hot rod fest to rival Mario Kart exclusively on Nintendo, World, an MMO racer, Hot Pursuit, made by the same team that also gave us the Burnout series, and this. All released in 3 years. I almost guarantee you everyone watching this would have got at least one of these games when it was new. To say the franchise was in an experimental phase would be an understatement, but at least it gave Black Box more time to make a new game and focus solely on the 7th generation. The premise was a Hollywood action film and being able to play it. And hey, if cars are the main stars, Need for Speed was the right franchise for that type of game. The stories and cutscenes in the run used motion capture performances with QuickTime events instead of full motion video cutscenes, with lead actor Sean Faris, familiar with stunt work, did all the motion capture himself, so they needed more than just his voice and likeness. When capturing the character models and their facial expressions, they put 97 markers on the actors' faces, including an electrical sensor around the eye socket so it can track where your eyes are moving, even when they're closed, which I didn't think about until I saw the first cutscene again and saw just how lifelike the eyes were compared to Mass Effect, for example. Need for Speed The Run was released for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and PC, and Nintendo Wii and 3DS on November 2011. And like the Hot Pursuit review, we'll briefly look at the Wii version as well, since they're very different games.
Jack, get back in the ring!
I only remember seeing this game on a Wikipedia page before the release when looking at Shift, and that was about it. It was until I saw an episode of GameSack on convention pickups in 2017 included Need for Speed The Run, and it was then I discovered that action film style it was going for. But it was a year later when I started to realize how popular the Need for Speed franchise was on ColourShed that I started buying more titles for it, and I got this copy from a local swap meet in early 2019 while it was cheap. And like a lot of games here, I'd play it for about half an hour to see if it works and not play it again until I review it. So here we are, 5 years later. Okay, that just made my job easier. This is the first thing that pops up before the first cutscene. Jack Rourke is simply a driver, one of the best, but in serious trouble with the mob thanks to massive debts, and finds himself tied up, ready to be crushed to death inside his own car. Fortunately for Jack, the mob did a poor job tying him up because he was able to escape the crusher and the mob.
What the hell? He's out of the car! Grab him! Grab him! Hurry up! Come on, come on!
With nowhere else to run, he meets up with Sam Harper, who enters Jack in the ultimate holiday road trip from San Francisco to New York, in which Jack might only receive 10% of the prize money, but realizing he'll still be earning $2.5 million and the mob debts cleared is enough to convince him, since he was nearly crushed to death only minutes earlier, so clearly he has nothing to lose.
Now we have to get you a car.
Cars, I got covered.
Now, let's be honest, Undercover is such a low bar to match that even with what we got, if everyone in this game was in their underwear, every single car was pink, and they were all racing in reverse to get to New York, it would still be light years better than Undercover.
What? Speak up!
Las Vegas, top 150 or we're out.
Okay, got it.
The story was written by Alex D. Rakoff, who also directed the short film for Grand Theft Auto 2, fun fact. And the mission is clear from the start, so it makes sense, though they did need to introduce certain characters during the loading screen before you see them, which ruins the surprise for me, even if they give you an explanation and motive. The cutscenes and presentation look good. I think it's because they're in games, so there's no illusion break. The camera angles, particularly at the very start, are perfectly placed. As I mentioned before, the character models look so realistic for its time, and the dialogue is mostly minimized to brief calls on progress and the protagonist and antagonist never interacting directly, which is just as well, because whenever someone speaks, it is quite cheesy.
You knew the answer before I even walked through the door.
It uses a very well balanced combination of licensed and original music, which means there were times where I could have it on while capturing gameplay. Composed by Brian Tyler, fun fact, who's done many notable films and even the F1 theme. And the set pieces which occur during gameplay or cutscenes are exciting enough. It's not bad. Another thing you would have noticed are QuickTime events during some of these cutscenes. Whenever Jack is suddenly in a world of bother dodging crushers, police, angry dogs, and oncoming trains. Feels like something out of Resident Evil 4. Certainly because I wasn't expecting it in a racing game. Like, imagine needing to stand up to Razor yourself or run away from Sergeant Cross on foot with QuickTime events. Because of that, there's more pressure to react fast enough, so they're complementary to the run. Yeah, trying to integrate the most basic of settings as it's part of the story, it made it hard to figure out the simple things like changing your vehicle. With the very few options I had at the start, I initially thought, okay, it must be because they're putting quality over quantity, considering that you can have a BMW M3 as a first car. But you can also pull over to the petrol stations in the middle of the stages and select from other cars you unlocked by other means, including Autolog XP or Pink Slip. It took me until halfway through the story to realize that. If you don't count DLCs, there are 57 cars in this game, though there are a lot of Need for Speed already tuned versions. Which might explain why this Audi Quattro is faster than an R8, or why some opponents can keep up with a Pagani Huayra using a Nissan 370Z. So even though there are technically no customization options, there are so many versions with a lot of performance upgrades fitted. And with 250 opponents to overtake, you want to make sure you get as much variety of cars as possible throughout these stages. The premise is brilliant, driving from one side of America to another, where you get a taste of multiple cities and landscapes across the country, including San Francisco, Las Vegas, Chicago, and New York, which provides an insane level of variety, and you never see the same circuit or road or sprint more than once the entire story mode. Right? It feels like I'm playing a spiritual successor of Sega's Outrun without Ferrari, since EA still couldn't get the license to have him at this point. Instead of respawning where you left off if you crash, it has a rewind system like something out of a Codemasters racer. Limited, so you can't spam the hell out of it. Good crash models too, maybe even better than Hot Pursuit, especially for licensed models. The loading times are extremely long, like up to 40 seconds just to restart if you want to have another go. It's so easy to take for granted how quicker PCs and consoles are today, but hey, a good motivator to do well on the first attempt. I went through nearly half the playthrough having to reset maybe 4 times total. It's only when the mob caught back up to Jack I was like, nah, let's just try and finish this stage. There are multiple difficulty options and okay, extreme is extreme indeed, so I can't complain about the difficulty. Each event has different scenarios past all the opponents before crossing the finish line. Occasionally just one, but they put up more of a challenge, time attack, eliminator. Overall though, you're spending the whole game leapfrogging from one opponent to another. And some have their own unique obstacles like sandstorms, avalanches, tornadoes, oncoming trains, and of course, mobsters trying to kill you. At times it feels too scripted, in which the way the opponents or police can teleport up to you even at top speed apart from the final half mile. Rubber banding AI, don't need to talk about it for the 100th time. In some stages, it's more about survival rather than the competition, despite what appears on the contrary. Like the final stage, despite the one-on-one, all you're doing is surviving whatever's thrown at you rather than trying to finish first, like Stuntman. Which that game and Split Second has proven, that's fine, but being a racing game, there still needs to be competition and fair balance. Then again, this is a series notorious for its blatant AI rubber banding. It's part racing, part action, where like the story, it's about setting up for the extravagant set piece, and if you have that sense of excitement after crossing the finish line, then job done. The series has gone through so many subgenres by this point, and there are always going to be trade-offs when you try something different, especially if Black Box were working top speed at this point. It's the first Need for Speed title to use the Frostbite engine, unlike EAGL, which powered the franchise throughout the 2000s. And unlike Hot Pursuit, which Criterion were using their own custom Chameleon engine since they know a thing about game engines themselves. I love graphics that give you a very high sense of scope wherever you are, that long draw distance. It looks solid graphically, not as detailed as Hot Pursuit, but light years better looking than Undercover, which looks like a fever dream stuck between two generations.
You've got to pick up some time, Jack.
Hang on, is this just a reverse variation of a previous stage? Like he arrived at Vegas and is going the completely wrong way? Now this would be okay if it wasn't as obvious, but when you have this giant long stretch down the hill at the end, and then a few stages later you're going up that same hill at the beginning of a stage, it is obvious. Now there's 300 kilometers of road in the run, which makes it the largest Need for Speed game up to that point, so I can't excuse the use of the same stage because there's only so many you can design, only so much space to work with. However, what can't be excused, and these things affect the whole game to the point of being an average experience. Firstly, the engine noises. Not only do they sound highly muffled like they're fueled with spanners, but cars don't even sound distinct from one another, it's always the same. Which, for a Need for Speed game, that alone you deserve to have your development studio shut down as punishment. I saw the making of the run where they were capturing engine noises for these cars at every conceivable angle, but I'm sorry, I didn't hear that when playing this game. There are a lot more glitches compared to Hot Pursuit. For example, why is my car all destroyed like that the next race? BMW M3 looking more like the previous generation model right there. And the driving mechanics feel very floaty and slippery. While not the worst in the Need for Speed series, it just ruined all the good things about the run. I know I said the game wasn't that difficult, but that doesn't mean the mechanics should just be phoned in. The whole time it felt like I'm just holding on for dear life. When you want the car to drift, it won't, and when you don't want it to, it oversteers. You can barely stay in a straight line, always constantly making minor adjustments. The car feels like a bubble is expanded inside. The only nice thing I can say is the chase cam, the way it moves from your inputs, feels very smooth. But don't expect the cars to control as well as Hot Pursuit, or technically Burnout. I'm just disappointed because the early 2000s Need for Speed titles developed by Black Box themselves control just fine.
Chicago in the top 50.
I'm just getting warmed up.
I was honestly hesitant to look at the Wii version of the run because of how bad Hot Pursuit is on the same console. But it's another example of one name, two games here, so fine. Supposedly the 3DS version is identical in every way apart from the QuickTime events being touchscreen, obviously, so at least I have that covered too. This version technically has a different story, but it carries the same premise. The main protagonist was nearly murdered at the start and immediately enters a race from San Francisco to New York with mobsters and police trying to stop you with checkpoints and limited lives. So at least unlike Hot Pursuit, it tries to resemble more closely to the main game it's based off. Unfortunately, I should have remained hesitant. The dialogue in these comic book style cutscenes is even cheesier and nonsensical. There's no car selection, seriously. The way stages are designed, you can literally complete these with the accelerator held down the whole playthrough, and even with that, opponents and police keep up with you like you have a hidden magnet attached to your car. And the scripted minigame moments, while I like the variety, feel very disjointed, unexciting, and controlled poorly, with some appearing with no chance to react to them, so you could easily fail the whole race before you can say, oh no. which makes it feel even more linear and scripted than the PS3 version. I gotta keep in mind though, this is a 3DS game being ported to the Wii, since the former at the time was a new system while the latter was about to be discontinued, so if you're playing this on a portable console in 2011, this isn't too bad, though still nowhere near as good as something like Mario Kart 7 for example. On the Wii, okay, this is better than Hot Pursuit, but still as forgettable as any shovelware title on that system. It feels as though none of the Need for Speed developers ever stay connected with each other because all of them control differently. It's intended to be an interactive action car chase film rather than a pure racing game with the way the story blends and the game modes. And with this many cars and total kilometers of road where you're almost always driving somewhere different, in terms of content, this is a larger game than you think. It's a decent Need for Speed game, and like a lot of titles in this series around this time, it's unique. And I think it was being compared too much to Hot Pursuit, which came out a year earlier, because when you compare graphics, sound, and controls, it makes the run feel bare-boned by comparison. Like, I wonder what people would think if it had the same mechanics as Hot Pursuit, the sprints were longer, and the engine noises weren't all the same for every car. A lot of flaws when you think about it, but there's potential to be a top 5 favorite Need for Speed game if they were all ironed out. It only takes 4.5 hours to complete, and when you look at what else there is to do, the challenge series and multiplayer where online servers are shut down, there's no replay value. It feels like a spark of a good game that shouldn't have been released at full retail price.
Relax, take it easy, put your feet up. Or maybe, if you're interested in doubling down, I just got a call.
If they made a direct sequel to this, where would they go next? Europe, Australia, Asia, South America? I guess that's what the Forza Horizon games are for nowadays. Anyway, the original plan for EA was to have Criterion and Black Box develop a game every biennial, with Most Wanted coming up next. But apart from assisting Visceral Games making Battlefield Hardlines, Black Box folded in 2013, and as I mentioned in the Hot Pursuit review, Ghost Games were formed to take full responsibility of the Need for Speed series. It's kind of sad. Black Box developed a lot of my favorite racing games, forming a part of my childhood, but at the turn of the decade became just another one of many developers surplus to requirements by EA. So was the run the most dignified way to go out? Well, apart from having a title suggestive enough to belong in a Ratchet & Clank game, I think so. If you can get it for a mega cheap price, which isn't very hard, it's worth trying at least once. Thanks everyone supporting on Patreon, including Anthony Cossins, Bibbs, Brittleback, Cooper Munn, Darcy McIntosh, Emmanuel Figueroa, Eric Barboza, Atmosphere, Nightkid Gaming, Pizza GT, Ruben Percog, Sam Sneed, Stefano Sivo, Tickford45, and Thomas Rosendale, as well as everyone watching this review. Don't forget to support on Patreon, join the Discord server, follow on Twitch, Instagram, X, Facebook, and speak to you guys soon. Spenny out.